Hi, peeps. You're listening to She's My Cherry Pie, the baking podcast from the Cherry Bombe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessie Sheehan. I'm a baker, recipe developer, and author of 4 baking books, including Snackable Bakes. Each Saturday, I hang out with the sweetest bakers around and take a deep dive into their signature bakes. My guest today is Nancy Silverton, the renowned chef, baker, and cookbook author behind some of Los Angeles' best restaurants, including Osteria Mozza, Pizzeria Mozza, and Chi Spacca. Back in the 80s, Nancy founded Brea Bakery and helped revolutionize the artisanal bread movement in the U.S. She is also the subject of a fantastic episode of Netflix's Chef's Table. Nancy joined me on the show a few years ago to talk about the cookie that changed her life, a peanut butter cookie. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, definitely do so. And today Nancy is here to tell us about another unforgettable baked good in her repertoire, the dessert she made for Julia Child that brought the iconic French chef to tears on television. In 1997, Nancy appeared on Julia's PBS series, Baking with Julia, and prepared a Crème Fraîche Brioche Tart topped with wine-poached fruit and sabayon. After taking a bite, Julia teared up and announced it was a dessert to cry over and the best dessert she'd ever eaten. Today, August 15th, would have been Julia's 114th birthday, so it feels especially meaningful to talk with Nancy about her relationship with Julia and the brioche tart she made for her. Stay tuned for my convo with Nancy Silverton. If you love our show, did you know that we publish a free baking newsletter every Saturday to correspond with each new episode? Check out Cherry Bombe's Substack to subscribe to our She's My Cherry Pie newsletter today, where you'll get exclusive insights about my guests on the show, their recipes, and other fun baking news and tips. Plus, check out our other free newsletters, where you'll find the latest food and fashion news and browse through our recipe catalog, which is filled with some really great recipes. While you're there, consider becoming a paid Substack subscriber to get access to exclusive content from Cherry Bombe magazine, invites to our monthly Bomb Squad meetings with industry pros, and discounts to events like our annual Jubilee Conference. A subscription is just $6 per month or $55 a year. Learn more at cherrybomb.substack.com or click the link in our show notes. Let's chat with today's guest. Nancy, so excited to have you on She's My Cherry Pie and to talk Crème Fraîche Brioche Tart with sabayon and fruit with you and so much more. First of all, I love that we are chatting while you are in Italy, a place that you've been visiting every year.
I've owned a house here for about 25, and I've been visiting this town for 28.
Oh, my God.
I had been to Italy before that. That is true.
Yes.
But as far as where I am in Umbria right now, that's about a 28-year.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, same hole. Just before I was talking to you, by the way, my, let's call my handyman was over. And everybody that dreams about having a home in Italy, or let's say the countryside in Italy, everything about it is worth it. But the other thing is that everything constantly needs to be fixed, no matter what.
Yeah.
So the project that for 28 years is still in process because everything is constantly breaking down.
I always start interviews asking my guests about early baking memories. Can you share one of maybe the first time you baked something, like when you were little or later on in life?
Well, I'm going to try to think of when I was little, but I'm going to try, I feel like probably 80% of people that you interview in the baking world will have a memory baking with their grandmother or baking with their mother that's very, very strong and help them on that path. Definitely neither of my grandmothers baked at all. And my mother also did not bake, but there was 2 things that she was really proud of. One was her apple pie, because she loved the way she made the crust, that she wasn't concerned with if she could roll out a perfect piece of dough to perfectly line a pie pan like I would be doing. But she loved the fact that, you can just patch it together. And I just can see that sentence over and over again. I love making this pie because I don't have to be precise. But the other thing that she loved, and I still do to these days, but in those days they were called Mexican wedding cookies, right?
Yes.
And they were the very tender ground nut cookie with tons of powdered sugar that when you bit into it, you just left a whole blanket full of powdered sugar all over you. And she loved making Mexican wedding cookies.
Oh, I love that. Do you remember what nuts she used? I feel like people use pecans. They use walnuts.
She used walnuts.
Okay.
And I have switched actually to sometimes pecans and sometimes a mixture, but I really love the pecans in it. It's a stronger flavor.
I agree. I tried to make them with pistachios recently and they were beautiful, but I just couldn't pop that pistachio flavor, the way you can.
It was the other nut. Right.
Yep. And I also read about your mom, speaking of your mom, that she was actually an adventurous home cook. And that you guys ate dinner together every night with, at 6:30. And I'm impressed. Was she inspiring to you? I mean, I know you weren't cooking so much when you were younger, but was that inspiring for you, all of the delicious food she was making?
Interestingly enough, and this was something that I just recently talked to a friend of mine who we grew up with. Our parents met when both of us were like 3 years old, and they were of very similar minds. And the two women were very strong women and very career-oriented women. So growing up, I'm just putting that out there, but then I'm going to switch back to growing up. My mother did not cook the food of my generation, and I hated her for her. I was embarrassed for it, and I criticized her for it. Now, I loved the ritual of eating at the table, but I didn't like what I was eating. And I didn't like what I was eating because I was really a product of television and what everybody else was eating. So I was a product of convenience food, the era of real convenience food and real bad convenience food. And that's what all my friends were eating. And I would just beg, can't you make what everybody else was making? And she wouldn't and couldn't. And one thing about my mom is that she really enjoyed putting down whatever she was doing at, say, 4:00-ish and making dinner. So making our nightly dinner was never a chore for her and never something that she didn't like. She really embellished it the way that I do, in the sense when I come to Italy, what do I do on vacation? I cook, because that's what gives me peace of mind.
Yeah.
And that's what my mother did. But she did it by herself. And I asked my friend, her name is Margie, why do you think neither one of you and I cooked with our mothers in the kitchen? Because her mother loved to cook too. And she said that, and I thought this was really interesting, our mothers didn't raise us to be homemakers. I think that was maybe subconsciously what a lot of other women sort of did of our generation with their children, and especially their female children, is you're going to need to know these tools to be successful in your home. And so come into the kitchen and cook with me. And I thought that was really smart of my friend Margie, if that makes any sense.
It does.
If I asked my mom, hey, Mom, teach me, of course she would have. But she didn't look at that as something that she needed to do to help me grow into what I would be.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like it wasn't a priority for her because she wanted you to have success in the world in whatever way you wanted to have it, not necessarily in some traditional female homemaker way. Oh, I think that's really interesting. The new issue of Cherry Bombe magazine is here. The theme is Game Changers, and we have 5 different covers featuring 7 superstars who have changed the game in a major way. The issue celebrates the visionaries, innovators, and changemakers who are reshaping the worlds of food, drink, and hospitality. To get your copy today or check out our list of retailers, visit cherrybombe.com or the link in our show notes. Into your professional life a little bit. You had an epiphany during your freshman year of college while cooking vegetarian food in your dorm and kind of realized you'd stumbled upon what you wanted to do, which was a career in cooking. And although you went to the Cordon Bleu in London and studied, it wasn't actually until you returned to the States and started working at the restaurant Michael's that you discovered your love of pastry and baking. Can you tell us what happened at Michael's that so inspired you?
Yeah, well, I had a very kind of old school mentality of you get your foot into a job and then the world opens up. It may not be how you wanted to get in, but you do it anyway. And that was the situation at Michael's. There wasn't anything available in the savory side of the kitchen, but there was in pastry. And so I said, absolutely, anything for me to get into the door. Now, I had just come off, or a year earlier, I had gone to the Cordon Bleu, where certainly pastry was part of my education in the program. And I think it was the most unsuccessful part as a student there. I mean, I really was so intimidated by pastry because of the way I think it was taught. And that precision scared me, if, I would say, well, does it have to have that much sugar? It's so sweet. Yes. That many eggs. Yes. And it's like, okay. So it frightened me. Right. So I got to Michael's, and there was just a brilliant pastry chef. His name was Jimmy Brinkley. And I don't know if he's still doing pastries in Seattle. I have lost touch with him, but he was the pastry chef, and he was very, very temperamental. Do I want to say that that's what pastry chefs are? But I don't think I want to say that. But he was very temperamental. Michael and Jonathan Waxman, Jonathan was the chef who hired me and the chef at Michael's, both thought that Jimmy had 1.5 feet out the door. So they said, you need to go in there and you need to learn everything because he will not stay. And he did outlive me, by the way. I left him and I went on to Spago, but that's another story. And so I started working with him. And what was so eye-opening for me was that, and this was something that I couldn't be taught, or they didn't teach me at the Cordon Bleu, which was, if you understand the basics, and that's in cooking and everything, you got to understand and have a good grounding of those basics. But once you understand them, then that's when your, let's say, creativity can come in. And so I saw Jimmy making all sorts of things. And for that time was very unusual. We're talking 1979. So in 1979, you went to a restaurant and you had ordered a dessert. And every dessert had a name because every dessert had already been done, right? In the type of restaurant at Michael's, at high-end restaurants, and probably across the country, that was the case. And here Jimmy was making all these desserts that didn't have names. They only had ingredients. And I watched him and followed him, and that is what changed everything about what I thought about pastry. Not only I saw how much there was open for interpretation, but I also loved that the pastry department was such a small entity within a kitchen that we were able to do everything that involved pastry ourselves rather than relying on, say, prep cooks and, other parts of the kitchen. We just did it all, and it was the two of us, and I loved that.
Quickly, we're about to get into baking with Julia, I promise. But I know last time we spoke, you had just written, I think it's your 9th cookbook that was your last one?
11th. Oh,
my God.
By the way, I just painfully finished my 12th.
Well, that was going to be my question. Can you tell us anything about it?
So the one that when we last talked and that I finished was, the main title was The Cookie That Changed My Life. And it was a total baking book, mainly sweet, right? There was a savory section in there too. And so the follow-up book that I just finished is a book when my publisher and my agent came to me and said, we want you to do another book quickly because your last book was so successful. What do you want to do? And I was in the midst of developing recipes for a diner that I have with Phil Rosenthal in Los Angeles. It's called Max and Helen's. So I thought, well, let me do a book on that genre, not a Max and Helen's cookbook, but a cookbook that has many of the recipes that I'm developing right now for Max and Helen's, but also some other, maybe let's call it the food that I wanted my mother to make but didn't, like tuna noodle casserole, right? And green bean casserole. And, I don't know if it's a comfort or if it's nostalgia or because I haven't quite gotten the sound bite to say, oh, it's this book, because I have a little bit of time. It's not out yet. It's turned in. The photography's done. But it's sort of along that. Nostalgia, dinerish food.
Oh my gosh, Nancy. Literally my favorite. The Nancy Silverton spin on that kind of food is like literal heaven to me.
Well, one thing that you'll want to get, and it's one thing that is the most talked about at the diner, is, I gotta say, hard work as everything is, but that waffle.
Ooh.
I wanted to call the book, but they won't let me, I don't think, because it's not marketable. The last book was The Cookie That Changed My Life. I really wanted to call this The Waffle That Will Change Your Life.
Oh, I love that.
I do too.
A companion book.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Is it yeasted?
It is on a sponge, and there's great flavor in there, and it's really light, but it's substantial. And that's, if you were to look on Max and Helen's chat or whatever,
Yeah.
what people are saying, that's all they talk about really is the waffle.
All right, now on to baking with Julia, both literally and
Yes.
figuratively. We're definitely going to do a deep dive into the tart you baked on the third season of Julia's show in 1997. But what I found so interesting is you'd actually been on the show before in season 1,
Yes.
making pecan sticky buns and savory brioche pockets. And I feel like they had kind of decided you were their brioche expert.
Well, that's funny. I did do brioche, and I
Yeah.
don't even remember that, because
Yeah.
I did do another series with Julia.
Yep.
Which was not a baking series. So Julia, a few years before that, she did a series. I don't even remember the name of it because it was so traumatic. I think I put it out of my mind, but it was something that was like, let's say, Great American Chefs. You'll
Yeah,
find it.
Totally.
Okay. You'll find what it was, but it was not baking. I did a baking part of it, and I might have been the only baker on the series.
Yeah.
And there was a book on that too, a much smaller book.
Yeah.
I mean, it was red and black. But anyway, so that was a show that she shot. And the premise of that show is that she traveled and went to the different either kitchens or kitchens on locations of the different chefs around the country. So it wasn't shot at her house.
Yep.
And I did one, and mine that I did was on sourdough bread. And it was really difficult. And I was the first shoot of that series, and they did not have it really down on the format, right? And so what a thing to be the guinea pig of a sourdough bread, right? Where I had to like open up the oven and say, wow, that smells good, when it was bread that was baked yesterday. That, Anyway, I felt like it was just awful. And they came back to me and they said that episode was the most successful of that series. And because of that, not only did they want me to come back, but they were doing a whole baking series, but they were going to do it in Julia's kitchen rather than not. And rather than me talking to a camera, or all the chefs that were in that original series talking to a camera, we were going to be side by side in Julia's kitchen showing her something. It took a lot of arm twisting, I got to tell you, because the first one was just really... I think it almost brought me to tears, the amount of just all of the reshooting and the stopping and the starting and look this way and look that way and move your hands this way. It was just, I couldn't get any kind of momentum, right? Yeah. They said, this is going to be different, much more impromptu, and she's going to be with you. So I agreed to do it. So that's how I got out there on that baking show.
Yeah, I wondered, that was one of my questions, was what was it like to be in her kitchen? But I think now I know the answer. It was actually better than being in your own.
Oh, so much better.
Yeah.
And, and also she had a really modest kitchen, the way that I have not only in Los Angeles, but definitely in Italy. And I really appreciated that she, she had just a couple things that plugged in, right? Yeah. It was just a normal kitchen, and it wasn't like intimidating. And she was right there next to me. And I was teaching her how to make this dessert that I'm not positive why I chose this dessert, but I'm sure glad I did, because that's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean,
my gosh.
Every couple of years, all of a sudden, it's like, hey, I just saw you on the Julia Childs video. It just keeps getting repeated and repeated and repeated.
Yeah.
And so
I was going to ask you, because at first I didn't understand that the brioche tart was actually part of your repertoire, and I read was a signature dessert at Campania.
Yes.
Yeah. And that you actually served it for breakfast and for dinner, and people loved it. I loved when you said to Julia, I can't remember what she asked you, but you said, like, well, the good news is everyone loves this when they taste it.
Yeah. And that really was, and we've, just recently, it's funny, in Mozza, I don't know, it's seasonal because I do top it with sauteed stone fruit. So it is seasonal.
Yep.
But 3 years ago, I think I decided to try it on the menu at Mozza. It wasn't on for 15 years. And then all of a sudden I put it back on, and wow, does it sell well. And of course, anything sells well with a story. So all the servers have to do is, oh, you should try the brioche tart. This is the tart that made Julia Child cry. And right away sold,
Oh my gosh.
But I didn't do it for a long time.
Yeah. So you made this crème fraîche brioche tart with this white wine sabayon and fresh fruit. And Julia famously called it the tart a triumph. And with literal tears in her eyes, said, "This is the best dessert I ever ate." I think there's a funny story, and she also said a dessert to cry over, which I loved.
Yes.
There's a funny story that I think is true, but you never know. You didn't know why she was crying, and you wondered if she'd burned herself on the hot fruit.
Yes. Yeah, that was all sort of, nothing of all of this was planned. When we started the show, she told me and all of her guests the same information. And the information was is that yes, the show could be edited, but she didn't like to edit it. She liked to keep it as close to real time as possible, so that 5 minutes, I think it was, or 3 minutes before our time will run out, and I need you to cut a piece and shove it in my mouth, I will hit you on your hip. Because her arm was low, my hip was down there, and she could just slap it, right? And at that point, get it together. In the cooking competition world, It's the clock stops now, or whatever, So the tart is finished. It's out of the oven. The sabayon was made. I have my stoned fruit in this syrup ready to saute, and I get this tap. So I have to quickly cook the fruit, put it on the tart, spoon the sabayon over, the spice nuts, powdered sugar, and give it to her. And I had 3 to 5 minutes to do it. Well, the syrup that the fruit is cooked in is very hot, right?
Yes.
And so when I cut that and I put it in her mouth and I see tears just rolling down, I'm like, okay, I burnt her, right? And that's when she turned and said, "This is a dessert to cry over." And then I was like, oh, wow. And it took me a little bit of time to figure it out, but I figured out really what happened. And I've used this example a lot of recently, is that feeding her this dessert or making this dessert for her is what a chef or a cook ideally wants to do with everything they make. And that is to touch a note that's really special and emotional for somebody.
Yeah.
And it was clear that I gave her that bite, she ate it, and her mind went back to the days when she was living in France with her husband, Paul, who was no longer alive, and they were eating something similar to this, because this is a French-inspired dessert of a yeasty base with sabayon, right?
Yeah.
And clearly, it wasn't that the dessert itself made her cry. It was the memory that made her cry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that so much, Nancy. It's so, so good. And I think you've said that, and I am sure you have had many, but that this was indeed the best compliment you ever got, Julia's tears.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good story. And it's so great. I had watched it before when I interviewed you before, and then I watched it again yesterday, and it's so great. And you're so calm and cool and collected. You're like, oh yeah, I always cook with Julia. What do you mean? Like, you were amazing. All right, so now we're going to talk about the recipe. And I think it's worth noting that it's a 6-page recipe in the book. And I guess I didn't quite realize that the TV show had the companion book. I knew about Baking with Julia, but I didn't realize the book was actually connected to the show, which is very cool. Yeah.
So everybody had one recipe that they did, and then a couple others. And that's why I did the other desserts that have brioche.
Yep, totally. All right, so first things first, we're going to make a sponge or pre-ferment. I always like to ask questions that maybe we know the answers to, but just good to remind the listeners. Tell us why a pre-ferment is better than us just adding yeast to this recipe.
Plus, it's adding just a touch more flavor of letting the flour just age a bit.
Yep.
and the flavors mingle.
Yep.
And it's something that I borrowed, as a baker, and that's how I make always my brioche.
Yep. We're going to make this pre-ferment. We're going to warm some whole milk, and I love in the show you call it hand hot, which is such a great expression for how to refer to what the temperature of the milk you need when you're working with yeast, not too hot. We're going to add some active dry yeast. 2 questions. Do you ever use instant in your baking? And is it unusual that this yeast is not proofed before it goes into a pre-ferment, or that's the way it always is?
Yeah, no, that's the way it is. I don't use, when I say active dry, and I usually use compressed yeast just because I'm more comfortable with it.
Yep.
But they're really both strands of yeast. They both have, I find that the cake one is much better when it comes to savory, when there's not much sugar, and the dried one works better for sweet doughs.
Yep, makes sense. And we're gonna,
and that's just something with a little bit of trial and error back when I did the baking at Brea Bakery.
Yep.
I just sort of, I wanted to figure that out, and I noticed just a slight difference of performance.
Yep.
I don't use, sometimes when people think fresh yeast, they don't realize that it's the same as dry. It's just that it hasn't been dried so that in granular form, right? It's just that cake.
Yeah.
What I don't use is anything that speeds up the process.
Yes, like instant yeast. Understood.
Yeah.
And then you add a beaten egg to the pre-ferment. Is that an unusual addition?
Back in those days, which coincided with my baking at Brea Bakery, both starting out just in the savory breads, a lot of sweet things, I just did a lot of research. And I don't remember where that came from, but it came from somebody that made sense that if you add that liquid of the egg to that pre-ferment, it, again, is one of the contributors to possibly a better product. And so I kind of borrowed it from research.
Yep. And then we're going to add some unbleached all-purpose flour. And I'm assuming there's something you're going to, that the bakery is using, that the restaurants use, but is there an all-purpose flour that you love, like when you're at home?
Well, what I use when I'm at home is it's really easy to use King Arthur.
Yes.
They're long.
Totally.
I think it's well-sourced, they're flours, and they're consistent, and they're available.
Yep. So now we're going to put all the ingredients for the pre-ferment in a stand mixer bowl. We'll mix it together just with a rubber spatula. It's not on the stand mixer yet until well blended. And then we're going to sprinkle more flour to cover the sponge. Can you tell us why I thought this was fascinating to learn, why we're sprinkling the sponge with the extra flour?
Yeah, I do that because what it does is it becomes the marker for when the sponge is properly proofed. It causes that layer of flour to crack.
Yeah, I thought that
because it's growing. And so it's like, okay, done.
Yeah, loved that. We'll rest uncovered for 40 minutes until we see the cracking. Then we're going to make the dough. We're going to add sugar, kosher salt, eggs, additional unbleached all-purpose flour to the sponge. It's interesting. In the show, it's just regular old eggs. In the book, it says they're lightly beaten. Does it matter? Which way do you like to do it?
I just add eggs to my brioche, always, as it's going.
Yep.
And that could also be, the book, that whole baking book was very well tested by the queen of baking.
Dory!
Dory.
Yes.
And so that might have been something that she thinks is a better, you know what I'm saying? So
100%. I noticed little differences just comparing what I saw in the show. And I think you're exactly right. I think Dory was trying to make everything very user-friendly. So if you didn't kind of know what you were doing, you could still succeed. So we're going to add those things, the sugar, the salt, the eggs, the unbleached flour to the sponge. Now we'll set the bowl in a mixer, attach the dough hook, mix on low until just combined, sprinkle in a teeny bit more flour, and then once incorporated, increase the mixer to medium and beat for 15 minutes, scraping down the hook and bowl as needed. What does beating for so long give us? What does it give the brioche?
What we're doing is we're just developing the gluten to give it the strength.
Yep. And also that lacy and pull apart texture?
Yeah.
Or does that come later? Yeah, because that's...
No, that comes from properly mixed.
Yep. Now, during the mixing, the dough's going to wrap around the hook and it's going to slap the sides of the bowl, which I always love that expression. Tell us about the slapping.
Well, first of all, it's the sound of the dough hitting the bowl, and that's where you're getting your kneading it, replacing the kneading, let's say, by hand.
Yep.
But it also adds, I always say when you cook, and certainly when you bake, it's not only your eyes that tell you, and certainly we all know the taste that tells you, but it's also the sound.
Yeah.
And if you were not to hear that sound, let's suppose your sound was not slapping, but it was sloshing.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's not enough flour in it, or you had way too much liquid,
Yeah.
right? But if you know that you're looking for that slapping sound, it's just one more identifier that you are so far on the right track.
Yeah, no, I loved that. I don't think I think about that when I make bread, but I love that. And also that trick of the flour on top of the sponge. I thought both of those were awesome tips for bakers and the listeners of the podcast, etc. So now we're going to work the butter before we're going to add it in. And the butter needs to be worked because we want it to sort of have that same texture as the dough for easy incorporation.
Yes. So if you took hard butter out of the refrigerator, it would not incorporate.
Yep.
Just like mixing two of any kind of consistencies, they have to always be similar.
Yep.
So you don't want it greasy, but you want it soft and pliable.
Yep. And you do this with Julia, which I love. We'll use a dough scraper to sort of smear it bit by bit across our work surface until smooth, soft, cool. And you say in the show, don't touch it with your hands. You'll warm it up. We want cool butter.
Right.
Now, all of those moments, Nancy, with you and Julia are so dear. Just like her asking you, even though she might know the answer. And
that's what I loved about this show. And I have to say, I didn't see the other shows even at that time. But she was just always so curious. And what was so special about her, and what I think we all have to remember, is that we never stop learning, and there's always something to learn, even though she was, again, the grande dame, right?
Yes.
So she looked at her, certainly at me, but I know that she looked at everybody that she invited into her kitchen, that she wanted to learn from them. Yeah. And she was respectful to not to say, yeah, we know that, or I know that, or that's what I do. And that, it was not. It was like she was the student.
Right, 100%. The only thing she would say, I thought this was so cute, like you would say 3.5 cups of flour, and Julia would be like, that's a pound, isn't it? Like she was like, she kind of got into the math of things, which I thought was adorable. But anyway, so with the mixer on medium-low, we're going to add the butter a few tablespoons at a time. The dough's going to fall apart when the butter's added. You tell us not to worry. We'll increase the speed to medium-high for a minute and then reduce to medium and beat for 5 minutes, but just until it comes together, since we've already done that 15 minutes.
Right.
And again, we're listening for some slapping. The dough at this point should still feel cool. Can you tell us why is that important, the temperature of the dough?
Because we don't want it to start working quickly. So we all know that what makes things rise besides yeast and things like that is temperature.
Yep.
Right? And so in my world, we want to slow all that down.
Yep. So we're going to transfer the dough to a very large, either oiled bowl or buttered bowl, cover with plastic wrap, and let rise until doubled, about 2 to 2.5 hours. And then we deflate the dough, and you have a specific way of showing us how you do it in the recipe and on the TV show. You kind of place your fingers under a section of the dough and just kind of let it fall back into the bowl. And you go around the bowl doing it that way. Can you remind us why it's important that we deflate the dough right now before it goes into its second to last rise?
Yeah, because then we need to deflate it because we need to sort of mix up the yeast so the yeast is not exhausted of the yeast eating everything that's around it. I always describe it as like Pac-Man eating all the sugars that the flour has in there, and then it's like then it overproofs, it's exhausted, all those kinds of things. So when you deflate, you don't want to deflate and just like pound everything out of it, because then it never comes back properly. It has to work too hard to come back, and you never get the same volume. You want to gently deflate it, and the yeast kind of moves around and it finds new sources of new food.
Yep. Now we're going to cover tightly with plastic wrap. We'll chill 4 to 6 hours or overnight. Then we're going to line a baking sheet with and we're doing that at room temp, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Then we're going to line a baking sheet with parchment paper. This was an interesting one. This must have been a Dory flourish. But on TV, you don't grease the 10-inch flan ring. But Dory does in the book.
Okay.
But again, I think that's protection for the reader.
Yeah.
And you tell us that the flan mold or the ring needs to be a teeny bit higher than most, like about an inch to 1/4 of an inch. But you also say we can use a 10-inch springform pan, the ring of a 10.
Right.
Is there a brand of, if somebody wanted to try to make this, is there a flan ring that you would recommend?
I haven't bought them for so long,
Yeah.
flan rings. It used to be mat fur.
Ah, okay.
But now so many companies make them. And what I was trying to differentiate, because the world of baking accessories has, grown enormously, right?
Yes.
In my day, there was just the pie pan, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden when people started making quiches, you got a fluted tart ring, right?
Yep.
And then one day you got the French tart rings with the rolled edges.
Yep.
And I think they were an inch high. And those were tart shells, bottomless, right?
Yep.
Tart shells, that was really. And then what I learned when I went to baking school at Linode is the one that's higher than the tart one is called a flan ring. So I always call them. And then the really high one, the one that's like 3 inches for cakes, was called a gâteau. That was a gâteau mold.
Yeah.
But so it was a flan ring, but it didn't really mean anything to anybody. So, but you need the height because even though, and we'll say this, the dough itself is not being rolled out and we're not lining the shell. We are actually doing a flat, round dough, crimping it on the surface, right?
Yep.
And then putting the ring over it to keep its shape. But when it rises and actually bakes, it grows to the top of what that flan ring would be, which is about, I don't know, did I say, is it 2 inches, 1.5 inches?
Yep. Basically, I think you tell Julia it's about an 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you need. So, now I know at work, since we've been doing it, we don't even have flan rings there because they don't make things on that height.
Yep.
So we do use a much larger or a springform,
Yeah.
the ring of a springform pan, not at the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's good to know. That's how you're doing it now. So we work the dough into a ball. We're going to flatten it into a 5-inch disc. It should still feel cool, this dough. It'll be much easier to work with if so. On a floured surface, we're going to roll it into a 12-inch circle. I couldn't tell if the rolling pin that you're using in Julia's kitchen was yours. I don't think it was tapered at the edges. What's your favorite rolling pin? Like, do you think...
Tapered at the edges. It's so funny. I call them the American version with the handles and the ball bearings. Because I never baked with my mother or my grandmother, I never used a rolling pin until I went to France.
Yeah.
Or the cordon bleu. And there, the European style is the tapered edges. So I remember the first time someone gave me one with I didn't know what to do with it. It was like I learned how to drive with a stick shift.
And then someone gave you...
And then someone gave me an automatic. It's like, what do you do?
That's hilarious. Yeah. We're going to roll it out into a 12-inch circle. It's going to be a few inches larger than the ring. Then we're going to center the ring on top of the dough and press it gently to make an indentation, which is basically going to be our crimping guide, as it were.
Yes.
We'll remove the ring, and then we're going to diagonally crimp the edge of the brioche on the outside of the ring indentation, but let the crimp fold on the inside, about 1/4 inch inside. And listeners, that might sound strange in describing it, but it makes sense if you see the pictures in the book or watch Nancy make it with Julia, which is so special.
Yeah, it's I know. It's one of those things that it's very hard to write what you're doing.
Exactly, but when you
can see exactly.
Yeah, when you see it, you're like, that makes perfect sense. Interestingly, we'll place the ring on the baking sheet and we can lift the dough up and place it into the ring.
Yeah.
And then we'll let it rise uncovered until it's doubled in size, about 45 minutes. How come uncovered? I feel like sometimes I do a last proof like this with like something lightly covering, like plastic wrap or a dish towel or something.
Well, because it rises pretty quickly because it's so thin.
Yep.
And you want to be able to touch it to see if it's proofed enough. So I just don't, and it doesn't have to be covered.
Great. Now we'll center a rack in the oven. We'll preheat to 275, which is super low. You and Julia discussed this, and I noticed that too, just reading the recipe. And that's because of the custard that we're baking?
Yes.
Yeah. Now we're going to whisk some crème fraîche and an egg together. You and Julia have the sweetest discussion about making homemade crème fraîche. And she says to you, like, is it 1 cup of cream and 1 tablespoon of buttermilk? And you're like, yes, that's exactly my ratio. It's so sweet. Right. I just wonder, do you now make your own crème fraîche like that? Or do
we don't. There's so many great crème fraîche.
I know.
But I'll tell you, in 1979, when I was at Michael's, we made all of our crème fraîche.
I love.
Because you couldn't buy it.
Yeah. And you and Julia talk about the fact that if you do make it homemade, you put those two things together and you leave them out overnight. Then we're going to deeply dimple the dough on the bottom, like focaccia. tell us why we're dimpling. I know we're about to pour on the crème fraîche. Why are we dimpling?
Dimpling just like you do in focaccia so that it doesn't dome.
Yes, exactly. I also wondered if there's something nice about sort of the crème fraîche getting into the crevices.
And it does get into the crevices too, but it's mainly for when it rises.
Yep.
So it doesn't push the crème fraîche out.
So we'll spread the crème fraîche mixture over the bottom of the tart to where the crimping begins. We're going to sprinkle sugar over the crème fraîche until the custard just kind of won't absorb any more sugar. So tell us about that. Is that for looks? Is that for flavor? What's the sprinkling, rather than, let's say, folding it into the crème fraîche?
Because then it makes like a very thin crust.
Yeah.
Rather than folding it in.
Yeah.
And I got that technique from something I did years before that. It was called a Belgian sugar pie.
Ah.
And it was something that was with a croissant crust. And I think that, and it had that same sugar that went just on top to give you that little bit of a crust.
Yeah, I love that. So now we'll brush the edge of the tart with a beaten egg white, and we're going to save that yolk for the sabayon. We're going to sprinkle the edge. You and Julia call it crystal sugar, and she's never seen it before, but is it really what we now call like coarse sparkling sugar?
No, I think it's called... Well, maybe coarse. I know it has a funny name. What is it? Because I tried to order. It used to be in my day, of course. I love to talk about my day in 79. It was crystallized sugar. It was little squares.
Yes.
But now it's called, what did you say it was called?
I thought it looked to me, I was trying to like zoom in on it. It looked to me like a coarse sparkling sugar, that you use to decorate. And it's quite, the shapes of each granule are like a square or a rectangle, like they're quite pronounced.
Now I forget the name, but we don't call it sparkling.
Okay.
Another word is another, but it is exactly what you're saying, and it does have another name.
So we're going to bake for 30 to 40 minutes until the crust is golden, the custard's almost set, maybe a little bit loose, kind of like that Jell-O vibe that you want in a cheesecake, but not liquidy. We'll leave in the oven with the door ajar, or that's what you guys did on the TV show. And we're going to make a chilled sabayon with this caramelized sugar. At Campanile, you called it a white secret sauce. You tell Julia this kind of as a joke. Can you tell us what the joke is about calling it a secret sauce?
Because I didn't know what to call it, but it was a caramel with sugar and water, a light caramel, by the way, sugar and water, and vanilla bean, sometimes nutmeg, but I think this one just had vanilla bean. And then stopped the caramel with white wine.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a sugar syrup. It was a white wine syrup, so we just named it a secret syrup,
I thought that was hilarious, and I think
but there was no secret.
Right. I think you said it was just like a joke, the way like fancy chefs can be like, "Oh, this is so secret, I can't tell anyone."
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but it wasn't a secret at all. So we put some sugar in a skillet with relatively high sides or a saucepan, split and scrape. With Julia, you use Tahitian vanilla beans, you scrape the seeds into the pan, you add the pods. We pour the water just to cover the sugar. And we're going to bring it to a boil, but we are not going to stir it or swirl it yet.
Right.
Then when the sugar begins to have large bubbles, it just starts to change color. And you explain that now, once you see the color change, not only is it safe to swirl, but we need to swirl because of hot spots, yes?
Yeah, and coloring evenly.
Then we'll cook this for about 7 to 10 minutes until a deep golden color, removed from the heat. And I think you tell Julia to move back. I think you're adding like cold, dry white wine. If we added room temperature wine, would it like sizzle and seize and harden less?
It still might.
Yep. It doesn't really.
So, yeah.
So it sizzles, it seizes, it like hardens. You tell Julia to stand back, which she does. And then we'll return the pan to the heat and then bring the syrup to a boil again to melt the sugar. We'll pour some of the syrup through a strainer into a heat-proof measuring cup, and then the rest we're going to reserve for our fruit garnish. Now we're going to put yolks into our stand mixer bowl, and this is all done by hand. It's so cute because Julia does the drizzling and you do the whisking. But you put your yolks into a stand mixer bowl. You start whisking constantly. She drizzles in the strained hot syrup. Once it's all in there, you put that stand mixer bowl over a saucepan of boiling water, like a makeshift double boiler, and continue to whisk by hand for 5 to 8 minutes until the yolks are voluminous. And then you tell Julia, which I loved, and I'm sure this is still true today, you want to do this until you can barely stand to touch the mixture with your finger. correct?
Right.
So it's not just warm or
hand hot.
It's
right.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So now we'll attach the bowl to the mixer and we whip on medium-low for 10 to 15 minutes until cool and pale. Julia says, "Oh, it's almost white." I'm not good at her accent. I wish I was, but that's good. And it triples in volume. You tell us at this stage we still need the bottom of the bowl to be cool. What is the consistency of the sabayon when, like, we're sort of done before we add the cream?
But it's very thick and mousse-like.
Okay.
But the bottom has to be cold because you can't, well, then you know you've whipped it enough. But also you certainly, if you were going to add your whipped cream to it right away, if there was any residual heat on there, it would melt that whipped cream.
Yep. So now we're going to fold in heavy cream, whipped to soft peaks, and we'll add it in stages. I loved this. In the moment with you and Julia, your cream had separated. So you pull a Nancy trick out of your back pocket and add a little crème fraîche to it to bring it back together. It's such an awesome moment. Tell us about that.
The crème fraîche sort of breaks it down. So I don't know, was it separated or was it overwhelmed?
It was a teeny bit hard to see because those TV shows now are a little blurry. Yeah. It looked like it just wasn't as smooth. What Julia kept saying is
over-whipped, which is so easy. You turn your head and all of a sudden, but I used to think that, okay, at that point you got to throw it away and start over, because if you have over-whipped cream and you're adding it to something so fluffy and mousse-like, like the base of the sabayon, you're just going to ruin the texture. You want it to be as velvety as the other, right?
Yep.
And so that trick is either to add more unwhipped cream and continue to whip on a slower speed, not say 3, but definitely a 2, just to bring it back, or crème fraîche, which kind of, the word is not really correct when I say break it down, but in theory, it makes it a lot looser.
Yeah.
And then you can whip it a little longer and then you save it.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, in such a good TV moment, because it's just off the fly when you noticed, or on the fly, but you just kind of dollop it in, you don't measure it, and then you just whisk it by hand, and Julia's like, "Oh my God, look how smooth it is again." So she was very impressed by that, as was I. So when we're ready to serve, I think it's recommended to do so warm. You slide a...
Yeah, and that's why we left the tart in the oven.
Yes.
But like, for instance, at the restaurant, when we bake it much earlier in the day, we warm that slice to order.
Love. All right, so when we're ready to serve, we're going to do so warm. We're going to slide a cardboard cake ground under the tart, lift off the flan ring, and to garnish, we'll use like stone fruits, apricots, peaches, nectarines, plums.
Plums, exactly.
We'll slice them. We'll bring that reserved caramel wine syrup to a boil in a skillet, add the fruit, and then just sort of swirl the pan until the fruit softens. I assume that's pretty quick, the softening?
It's pretty quick,
Yeah. Then to serve... you're going to place the sliced tart on a plate, add that in. I don't know what you guys are doing now. I'd be curious to hear. On the TV, you add the caramel poached fruit first with a slotted spoon, then a little drizzle of the syrup, then you spoon on the white wine sabayon over the slice, and then you decorate with toasted and chopped almonds and a dusting of confectioner's sugar.
Right.
Are you guys doing that now? Same?
Yeah, we do it. I don't know if I didn't do it for a show or if I did, but we actually do these spiced sliced almonds. So we take the sliced almonds and we soak them in a sugar syrup that has a lot of cinnamon and nutmeg.
Ooh.
And then strain it and then lay the nuts out in a single layer on a silpat lined sheet pan.
Yeah.
And then bake them. So it gives the almonds some extra flavor and crunch.
Love.
And some of the nuts stick together, and that goes on. But maybe we didn't do that in this show.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Nancy. And I just want to say that you
was a pleasure.
Are my cherry pie. Oh, I'm so glad. That's it for today's show. Don't forget to follow She's My Cherry Pie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And tell your pals about us. She's My Cherry Pie is a production of the Cherry Bombe Podcast Network. Our producers are Carrie Diamond, Catherine Baker, and Jenna Sadu. Thank you so much for listening to She's My Cherry Pie. And happy baking!